Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Awesome. Welcome everybody to today's meetup. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about how to select law school. I think a lot of you are in the process of either applying this cycle or you're thinking about applying next cycle. And I've gotten a lot of questions about, how should I even decide which ones to apply to? And then once I get these acceptances, how do I decide which ones to pick? And I think those are very fair questions. But I wanted to at least, have an open dialogue about it with everybody and, just get a sense of where, how you guys are feeling, where are you applying, what are you thinking about during this application process, and giving you some, factors that you should be considering when picking law schools. Just so you know, everybody is unmuted right now, so I think I can actually mute you all. But if you need to talk, then you can go ahead and unmute yourself. So I've just muted everybody. So if you need to talk, just unmute yourself. So today we're going to try to keep it, relatively casual, but I recorded a video on this a little while ago, and I think it's really, really helpful. And I hate to, repeat all the same things in that video. So I wanted to go ahead and play the video first, and then, if you guys have questions, feel free to chime in the chat box. I'll be answering questions alongside the video. All right, sorry about that. I thought that was going to work, and it didn't. So basically, I wanted to at least show you guys how the LSAC probability calculator works, so that those of you who aren't familiar with it can, figure out what your likelihood is to getting into these schools. All of you are going to have to register at some point for the Law School Admission Council website in order to apply to law school. And you're going to have to create an LSAC account, and there's a ton of resources on LSAC's website that will help you try to figure out which law schools you want to apply to and what your probability of getting into them will be. So I'm going to drop the link for the LSAC probability calculator in the chat box. So please go ahead and open that up. Let me see here. Okay, so there's a link to the GPA and LSAT calculator. And basically, this will allow you to plug in different values for what your GPA is and what your LSAT score is, and figure out what your likelihood of getting into all the ABA accredited law schools is. You can play around with the calculator. You can limit it to, show you only schools that you have a really good probability of getting into, or schools that are reach schools, or schools that are safety schools. But if you haven't taken the LSAT yet, it's going to be hard for you to kind of gauge which of these schools you can likely get into, because that's going to be a very, very important factor in trying to get into law school. So, but what you can do is you can sort of play around with the range of LSAT scores and see, all right, if you haven't taken the exam yet, or you don't have a reportable score yet, what scores do you need to target in order to get into the right law schools? But, one of the really important things that I want you to do is I want you to start being more open-minded about what types of law schools you may be applying to. I think a lot of people, when they start going through the law school admissions journey, they try to think about, okay, well, what are the law schools that are close to home? What are the law schools that I feel like I could, get a really good job at if I go to those? They start researching, and you go online and you find out all these things about rankings, and you kind of get led down this weird path. So you probably have all heard that US News and World Report rankings are extremely inaccurate, and they're really hard to judge a law school based off of those rankings. So you're probably wondering, well, if we can't go off the rankings, what in the world can we go off of? And I think the answer is you need to figure out what's the most important thing for you. Law schools, there's a bunch of law schools that will give you a good education. There's a lot of law schools that aren't considered your top tier T14 law schools that will still give you a very, very good education. I think that, you need to think about regional reputation of the school. there are some law schools where if you want to practice in that particular geographic region, those law schools may have a really, really strong reputation in that region. For example, Southern Methodist University here in Dallas has a really, really strong reputation in Dallas. If you want to practice in Dallas, Texas, and you want to be at a large law firm, or you want to be in government, or if you want to, get a clerkship here, Southern Methodist University is a great school for you to be able to do that. But it's virtually unknown if you go to the Northeast. I ended up going to the Northeast for law school, and if you would have asked anyone there what Southern Methodist University was, they would have had no idea. So you need to think about regional reputation. Where do you want to end up practicing in the long run? The T14 schools are great. T14, in case you don't know, is this designation of the top 14 law schools. It's just a random line drawn in the sand by US News and World Report that they rank the top, 14 law schools have been consistent for the last 4 decades or something, or however long US News and World Report has been coming out with their rankings. And consistently, about 14 schools, make that top echelon all the time. UT Austin cracked that top 14 in 2017, and they continue to start to climb those ranks. And so, people are always wondering, okay, so does that mean UT Austin is, now better than Georgetown, which was the former 14th school, or what does that mean? And what it really means is those law schools have name recognition. Virtually anywhere you go, they will have name recognition. T14 schools are really, really prestigious schools. They usually require much higher LSAT scores and much higher GPAs to get into, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they provide you a superior legal education, because at the end of the day, legal education is all about value. And if you go to a T14 school, what you need to know about those schools is that they cost a lot of money for the most part. Those schools generally don't have to give out as many scholarships because everybody wants to go there. So, the full debt cost of attendance at most of those schools, this means full debt cost of attendance. If you actually paid your entire way through law school on loans, you would be at least $300,000 in debt by the end of law school. That's an insane amount of money. So, and usually a lot of these schools only offer scholarships to about 50% of the students. So half of the students are subsidizing the other half of the students. So if you think that your scores are the kind of scores that could get you, into that 50% that gets some sort of scholarship, then great. But even at a discount, even getting some scholarships at those schools, you're still going to get out with about $200,000 worth of debt or more. So you really need to think about how that impacts you in the long run. And I want to give you some examples, from my personal anecdotes. When I was picking law schools, I went through the same thing that you did. I was trying to decide, do I want to go to a T14 school? Do I want to go to a regional school? How do I decide? And at that time, I already knew which practice areas I was interested in. I knew I wanted to practice intellectual property law. And there's not that many law schools that have really strong intellectual property programs. So when I researched strong law schools with intellectual property programs, there was a completely different list of top schools than the top 14. And I was sort of confused about that. So I started calling around and talking to IP attorneys and asking them, like, okay, well, what's the deal? It's like, I thought I could go to one of these T14 schools and I'd be fine, but they don't seem to have super strong IP programs. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And a lot of IP practitioners told me, yeah, that's the case with intellectual property. You don't have to go to a T14 law school. There are some schools that are really, really strong in IP that just aren't on the T14, and they'll still give you a good education. And so I started researching that more and digging into that more. And that's how I discovered my law school. I went to the University of New Hampshire School of Law, and I had a great legal education there. I think one of the great things about UNH is that they offer so many more IP classes than most law schools. And they also offer a whole bunch of extracurricular activities that other law schools don't offer. Um, so, for example, they had this USPTO clinic. It's a clinic where you actually get to represent real clients before the US Patent and Trademark Office in transactional trademark matters. And at the time, there were only about 10 law schools approved by the US Patent and Trademark Office for this pilot program where they could do this clinic. And getting that sort of real world practice really set me apart from other people when I went to get a job. And it really, really helped me distinguish myself from other people because whereas most law schools had 2 classes in trademark and copyright law, one in trademark and one in copyright, my law school had over 11 courses in some form of trademark and copyright law, whether it was registration or litigation or enforcement or the clinic or a wide variety of other things. And so when you're thinking about law schools, I want you to also think about what kind of practice areas do you want to be in. I know a lot of you are going to think it's way too early to be thinking about that, but it's really not. Law school these days is much different than law school 20 years ago. Now, I think a lot of people would say when you go to law school, you want to have a general idea of what kinds of areas of law do you want to practice. Um, if you don't know anything about other areas of law, go research that. And, it's totally okay if you don't know about a lot of different areas of law. Most people won't. There's no reason why most people would have any sort of intersection with the law before going to law school. If you've had a lot of run-ins with the law before going to law school, you should probably be concerned. But, I think a lot of people need to take the time to research different practice areas and figure out what being a lawyer is actually like in those practice areas. Because being a lawyer that does transactional trademark practice is totally different than being a litigator where you're in court every day. And it totally changes the way that will live your life day to day. It totally changes your corporate culture, everything about it. So I think you need to take the time, talk to a lot of lawyers about different practice areas, find out what you're interested in, and figure out, what types of programs that you really want to focus on when you go to law school. And that will help you narrow down what types of law schools you want to apply to. You'll be able to find law schools that are strong in your practice area, whether it's energy law or maritime law or intellectual property law. Some of these areas are just so niche practices that there's not going to be a lot of law schools that do that well. And some of them are going to be really broad. For example, like immigration or corporate law. I think you'll find a lot of law schools that offer a very robust curriculum that could, teach you lots of things about those areas. But there might be some specific extracurricular activities at those schools that you don't get to participate in if you go to other schools that would really help you set yourself apart when you go to get a job. Like, for example, if you want to do, criminal defense work and you're able to work on the Innocence Project at one of your law schools, that might be a really distinguishing factor for you. So you need to think about your practice area that you want to go into and what sorts of programs does your law school offer towards that practice area. Then you also need to think about cost. I'm sure for a lot of you, cost is a huge consideration. One of the things I really was worried about was I went to law school in the middle of the recession. I started law school in 2010 and the recession was in full swing. And I was so scared that I wasn't going to get a job on the other side. And I didn't want to be 6 figures in debt with no job. So, I really took the time to research, okay, what was my probability of getting a job when I come out of law school at certain schools? So the American Bar Association, yes, actually, I'm reading the chat. If you guys don't have the chat window open, go ahead and open the chat window. Hong Escobar, she's the pre-law advisor at the University of Texas, and she is providing some great resources for you guys in the chat box right now. Go and look at the ABA Standard 509 reports for each law school. Usually law schools have to post that data like smack front and center on their admissions page. You'll be able to find it, just search ABA 509 report. And there, in those reports, you'll be able to find employment outcomes as well as bar passage rates. Employment outcomes are super important. If you think you want to go to, this top tier law school that's going to cost a lot of money, you better make sure that top tier law school is getting you a job. So you can go and look at their past data from their past classes, their past graduated classes, and see what kinds of jobs are those students getting. Are they getting the kinds of jobs that you want to have? I think most people who think about becoming a lawyer think all lawyers are rich. They make the big bucks, right? But what they don't realize is, lawyer salaries are very, very different from each other, depending on what practice areas that you're in. And so I want to show you the NELP distribution of lawyer salaries. I'm pasting that in the chat box. So open that up. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a bunch of charts that show what first-year attorneys actually make. And people are floored when they see these charts because they think, like, everybody gets out of law school making $100,000 a year. That is not the case at all. So if you open up the salary distribution chart for the past year, here, I can at least share that on the screen. What you'll see is that there are two main spikes. And so on one end, you'll see, here we go. All right, I'm gonna share this now. Okay, so you'll see that there are two spikes. There's this spike, and then there's this huge spike on the right side. On the left side, what you're seeing is that about 50% of the graduates are making somewhere, in between $10,000 to $90,000 a year. And the adjusted mean is $91,833. So that's, about the average of what most people in this range are making. And then there's like virtually nobody making somewhere between $90,000 to $170,000. And then there's this huge spike over here between $170,000 and $200,000. And what this spike is all the people who are basically going to what we call big law. So the top 200 firms in America are called the AmLaw 100. That's what most people would consider big law. These firms set the market rate of salaries for all lawyers across the United States. And they usually go off of like one or two major firms in New York, and then everybody tries to match that. And so right now, the standard big law salary coming straight out of law school is $190,000. That's why you see that huge spike on the right side. But then you see all the people making somewhere between $40,000 and $90,000, and people can't believe that they might be, six figures in debt, and then they're making like that much money coming out of law school. But that's how it is. If you go to the public defender's office for your first year, in Dallas, the first years at the PDs usually make about $48,000. That's not a lot of money. So if you're going to one of these T14 law schools and you're paying $300,000 for 3 years worth of education, and you're telling me you want to go be a public defender after that, you better be hoping for that public service forgiveness. But, even nobody knows if that public service forgiveness loan option will be around for a long time. Basically, there is an option right now that if you go into public service, after a certain amount of time, you can get your loans, the rest of your law school loans, forgiven. But it's a pretty long amount of time that you have to stay in public service. And you can't work 4 years in public service, go into private practice, and then go back to public service. That restarts your clock. So it's a pretty long time that you have to stay in. So I think a lot of people need to think about, if you're going into a certain type of practice area where you think you're going to be making, not a lot of money, you shouldn't be going to an extremely expensive law school in order to get to that goal. That makes zero financial sense. So, the factors you should be thinking about are, okay, so again, practice area, regional reputation, um, the type of organization that you want to work for. So if you want to be in big law, or if you want to be in government, or if you want to be, wherever it is, you need to go and look at the employment data for each law school and figure out how many students are getting into each of the practice or each of the organization types that you're trying to get into. How many of them went to big law? How many of them went to federal clerkships? How many of them went, to public service or whatever? The other thing is, I want you to sort of broaden your horizons as far as the types of jobs that you might be interested in after law school, because one thing I didn't know anything about going into law school is federal clerkships. Federal clerkships are this very, very, very small subset of jobs where you're clerking for a federal judge. So in the United States, we have state courts and federal courts. Federal court judges hired through the same hiring database, which is called Oscar. And there's a very specific process for trying to land a federal clerkship, but federal clerkships are very prestigious. So much so that if you do a federal clerkship, usually if you go into private practice with a law firm, they'll give you signing bonuses, because the idea is that when you do these federal clerkships, you get to know the judge, you get to know how cases are decided, you get a lot of exposure into the practice of law. So it's a very, very enriching opportunity. So law firms are willing to pay a premium for people who have gone through that. Now, if you go to a federal clerkship and then you start at, a private practice firm, I've seen signing bonuses of up to $170,000. That literally means the day you sign on the dotted line, like, yes, I'm going to come work for your law firm, they hand you a check for $170,000. That could wipe out a good chunk of that law school loan. So if you're telling me you want to go to a law school that has a really good chance of getting you a federal clerkship, so that you can, pay off those kinds of loans, then okay, that makes sense to me. If you want to go clerk for the Supreme Court, okay, so think of federal clerkships as, this premium type of job. The Supreme Court clerks are the upper echelon of that. So that's the highest level of prestige you can get. And Supreme Court clerkships are extremely difficult to land, and they usually only go to people from like the top 3 law schools, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and then a sprinkling of all the other T14 law schools. And if you're really interested in that, I can drop a link. Somebody actually took the time to compile a chart of all the schools that send the most attorneys to the United States Supreme Court clerkships. So if you're interested in looking at that, go look at that. But basically, the Supreme Court signing bonus right now, if you go straight from your Supreme Court clerkship into big law, is $400,000. $400,000. That's insanity. So if you're going to law school to make a lot of money, then you might want to be considering some of these options. These were things that I just didn't know anything about when I was going to law school. So I'm just giving them to you. I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out and get a federal clerkship. No, there's plenty of people that aren't interested in it at all. I just want this to be on your radar so that when you're thinking about, hey, what are my options here and what types of jobs can I pursue, that you can start thinking about, okay, these are the kinds of jobs that are going to make the kind of money that people probably think about when they think about lawyers. And yes, absolutely. Talk to your potential law school's career services offices about clerkships. When you're talking to these law schools and trying to get to know them, see if you can chat with a career services representative and ask them, what's it like to try to get a federal clerkship from your school? Do you guys generally have a lot of placements every year, or do you only have 2? Because if it's only 2, then you better be pretty much the top 2 people in your class are going to get those clerkships. So talk to your law schools and find out more about, what is their process for trying to get people jobs? Where do most of their students generally get placed? Is it boutique firms? Is it solo practitioners? Is it government, academia, or clerkships? You should know a little bit about all of this stuff. And if you don't, if I'm saying a lot of things that you have no idea what I'm talking about, go research them, please, before you apply to law school. The law school game is just a lot different than what I expected it to be. And I wish there was like about 1,000 things that I knew before I went through the process. Because when you're going through the process of law school, it's like the moment you enter into the door, they turn on this fire hose at you, and you're just like frantically trying to drink from this fire hose the entire time, and it's blowing you away. So you don't have time to stop and think like, oh, what do I want to be when I grow up? Do I want to pursue a federal clerkship? Like, you don't have time to do all that. So I highly suggest that you research some of these things before you go to law school. The other huge thing that I want you to think about is, you know, what is the value of your school for the education that you're receiving? If, again, if you're planning to go to one of the top tier law firms, you want to make $190,000 straight out of law school, you might be willing to pay a little bit more for your legal education than if you want to go and do public service. And that's okay. There is no right or wrong about this. I think the most important thing is to stay true to what you want for your future. It's going to be really easy to get caught up in what everyone else is saying. If you're reading the law school Reddit, oh my God, it's going to be really easy to get caught up in what people are saying about, what types of law schools you should be going to, how prestigious they need to be, like all of that is going to be really, really hard to weed through all of that. You need to think about, what types of practices do you want to have? What type of lifestyle do you want to have? Because if you go and work for one of the top 200 law firms in America, I can guarantee you they're getting their money's worth out of you. You are billing like a dog. I mean, like, trust me, I worked for one. So, I think, people don't realize what it's like to put in, 3 weeks consecutively of 80-hour weeks. And, that extremely draining on you. And do you really want that to be your entire future, or do you only want it to be 5 years of your life and then you're going to pursue something else? That's fine. If you want to go to big law for 5 years so that you can pay off your loans and be done with it and then go into private practice or go in-house or whatever, I mean, those are good goals to have, but have some goals. Okay, understand what you're getting into, know what you want to do when you get out of it. And knowing that that's all subject to change. It's okay if your plans change, but at least get somewhat of an understanding about it. I think there's a ton of really, really great resources that you can use to look at different practice areas. Some of the ones that are in the chat here are Explore Dayton, or let's see here. So some of the ones that are in the chat here are, NALP's Official Guide to Legal Specialty Areas. That's a book that you can purchase on Amazon. You can also go to the ABA's website. They have a career center area where you can go and look at lots of different career paths and hear from lots of different lawyers who practice in different areas. And for goodness sakes, just connect with some lawyers. I mean, they're not all evil people, I promise you. Especially right now, I've seen so many lawyers opening it up on LinkedIn just to say, I'm here. If you want to chat with me, just reach out. Do that and take advantage of this time when everyone is stuck social distancing and they're trying to connect on the internet. I think people, in some ways, have let their guard down a little bit more to connect with people online. So, reach out to lawyers in different practice areas over LinkedIn and just ask them, hey, do you mind if we have a call so that I can learn a little bit more about what your practice is like? And, I'm thinking about going to law schools. I'm just now starting my journey and trying to find out more about different practice areas. And I'd really like to learn more about what you're doing. I don't know a single lawyer that would say no. I mean, at least out of all my friends. Maybe I just have really good friends. But I mean, generally, I always hear lots of my friends say, yeah, we take calls with law students all the time. I take calls with law students all the time, or potential law students, just reach out to lawyers and ask them, hey, can I learn a little bit more about what you're doing? And then use that opportunity, not just to ask them about their current practice, but ask those lawyers about why they went to law school. How did they choose their law school? Is there anything that they regret about it? Is there anything that they would recommend you not do? Because I think every lawyer probably has about 20 things that they would have done differently. And, you could save yourself from some of those mistakes by just learning a little bit more about what you're getting into before you dive right in. So that's basically most of the things that I wanted to talk about. Just giving you some ideas on some things that you should be considering that maybe not everyone tells you to consider. But I'm happy to open it up right now and just have a chat about it. If you guys are thinking about going to certain law schools, or if you have questions about certain law schools, is anybody here from Texas or thinking about going to Texas schools? Okay. All right, cool. All right. So do you guys have any questions about going to a Texas school or which schools you're considering?
Yeah, so I had a question.
Yeah.
Hi. So you talked a little bit about clerkships and
Yeah.
like federal ones are prestigious, especially the Supreme Court ones. And I was wondering like of what value like state clerkships are, and kind of like what kind of like compared to federal ones, like what value they give.
I mean, state court clerkships are still great because you get to experience, the litigation process. Like the types of skills that you're going to build in a state court clerkship are very similar to the types of skills you're going to build in a federal court clerkship. So you're still going to do a bunch of writing, a bunch of research, depending on your judge. They might have you actually write full opinions. All those things are insanely valuable. So I clerked for a state court judge when I was in my first year of law school here in Dallas, and he was a civil court judge. And it was great actually seeing the litigation process play out. You got to see good lawyering, you got to see really bad lawyering, you got to see what it's like when people try to represent themselves. I think it's still a very valuable professional experience. It's just not seen as prestigious as federal court clerkships because you're not kind of going through the whole dog and pony show of getting hired through Oscar and, bidding against all these other people who are applying for these prestigious clerkships. That's all.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
One question that I had as far as Texas law schools went,
Yeah.
is there like kind of a different process, kind of the same as it was for like applying for undergraduate schools for in-state students, where it's like a Texas application or whatnot?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so. When I applied to law schools, every law school had their own separate application. Some of them you could do through LSAC's website, and then some of them you had to go through law school specific websites. I think now there's a lot more that are going through LSAC's main application page, but I don't think so. Not for Texas schools.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Oh, sorry. About
No, go ahead.
Texas law.
Yep.
So how much is like the average indebtedness for like in-state students?
So you should be able to find that on their ABA 509 report. I don't have access to that off the top of my head, but I'm sure I could send you the link for it afterwards.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question about like when applying for law school, what is the weight associated with extracurricular activities and how law schools kind of
Yeah. So the law school application weight is really hard to talk about. What I can tell you is, LSAT score and GPA are the two most important factors. LSAT, usually people say is about 60%, GPA is like 40%, but even then it really, really depends on everything else that's in your application. But I would say, it's definitely secondary to those two factors, but extremely important, especially if you're trying to show a school that you're contributing something unique to the dialogue of that school. When you're looking at your law school application, you should look at it holistically as, okay, if you don't want them to just be looking at your GPA and LSAT score, what else do you contribute that's really unique to the law school experience? Law schools want to admit people that are going to enrich the education of all the people around them. So that's why they're looking for, people who are diverse. And diversity is very, very broad. So it's not just racial diversity. It's not just gender diversity. I mean, you need to think about what sort of different experiences that you've had in your life that other people really haven't had. If you're contributing something really unique to the atmosphere, you need to make sure your application mentions that somewhere, whether it's your personal statement or your diversity statement or something. If you did something like you worked on Innocence Project as a volunteer, or if you've done something like, you had 15 years of work experience before deciding to go to law school, or, you grew up in a family that illegally immigrated here. I mean, like, all those things, like, make you a very, very different person. So I think you need to think about, how to play all those things up in your application to support the other parts of your application. If your GPA and your LSAT score aren't as strong, then you're really going to have to knock it out of the park and write an excellent application in every other way. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else?
Hi, I have a question. I'm sure there's other people that are kind of on the same boat as me, and I think you just mentioned it. I've been out of school for 2 years.
Yep.
Oh, can you guys hear me? Sorry. I've been out of school for almost 3 years now. So I wasn't sure how they view those types of applicants differently from someone who is applying right out of college.
Yeah, I mean, I took 2 gap years, not intentionally, because I graduated from undergrad not ever thinking I was going to go to law school. I wanted to work in advertising. I worked for an ad agency for 2 years. The recession hit, derailed all my plans. And that's when I decided to go back to law school. So I think that's totally fine. I actually think taking gap years is really, really a good thing, because you have gone out and worked in the workforce in some way, and it really helps to inform your perspective as a professional. I think it's really hard when you go straight out of undergrad into law school, and then you start practicing as a young attorney. People don't realize how hard it is to deliver advice to people that are twice your age or 3 times your age, that they're relying on for their business or their life or their liberty or their property or their children. Giving that sort of advice is really hard when you don't have a lot of life experience yourself. So I think that it's totally a good thing if you've taken some gap years. Law schools don't look at that in a negative way at all. The only reason why they would look at it negatively is if you spent those years not doing anything productive. If you were like, I decided to take 3 years to backpack around, Europe for funsies, like, they're not going to love that. Now, if you spent those 3 years, yes, you backpacked around Europe, but then you decided you wanted to stay and work at an orphanage or do something really unique, that's totally fair game. I think, they're just looking for people who have, who have thought through this, thought, okay, why do I want to be a lawyer? And, how can I use my law degree to impact the world? I think that's what they're looking for. So it's totally fine if you've taken some time in between. You need to kind of mention why, you took that time in between, or how that has better prepared you for law school, or it helps inform your perspective for going to law school. But that's totally fine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned like public service, student loan forgiveness.
Yeah.
I've heard about it a little bit before, and I was wondering like how you can find out like if that's guaranteed in certain situations, or like how exactly that works. Because I know you said that it's not the easiest to obtain and it can take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know very much about
Okay.
that area because I didn't ever bank on that. I can tell you one of my friends who went to, I think she was in the public defender's office for quite some time, and she eventually decided to go into private practice, and she didn't realize that the clock restarted when
Mm.
she did that. And so I think she was pretty far along in the process too. I want to say it's 10 years, but I really don't know how much time you have to be in. I would just take a look at, if you search public service loan forgiveness, you should be able to find the
Okay.
information about
Cool.
it. So,
Thanks.
yeah. What else?
I had another question unless someone else wanted to go first.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Totally open dialogue. You guys ask whatever you want.
Cool. So I'm in Texas, like you had asked before, and kind of going back to like finding the best law school for like your area of interest.
Yeah.
You talked about like a couple different ways to do that, and I wanted to make sure I got like the specific link, like if one was sent out, or just general advice for, like, let's say a law school like specializes in that area, but like others do too. How do you compare those law schools against each other? And like what aspects specifically? Like I know you said clinics are good things to prepare you for a certain area, but just in general, like how would you kind of like create your own ranking, or are there good like rankings for certain areas of law?
Yeah, so there are some areas of law where they have rankings, but again, I think they're kind of should be taken with a grain of salt. What I would do is, so when you start researching the practice area that you're interested in, um, then go and look at what law schools have programs in those areas, and then call them up and see if you can connect with the faculty or somebody from those areas. So like I've talked to the IP clinic director at my law school before going, and she was able to connect me, not only to her program's information, but she was able to connect me to other IP faculty who could tell me about what they were doing. What I was really concerned about was because I was going into specifically trademark and copyright law. So intellectual property is a really broad umbrella. It covers patent, trademark, copyright, trade secret. And there are some people that only practice patent law, some people that only practice trademark and copyright law, and some people that do all of them. I didn't have a science background, so I could not practice patent law at all. So what I needed to know is, okay, are those law schools really focused in intellectual property on the patent side, or are they really focused on intellectual property on the trademark side?
I see.
And those are very, very different things. And so I actually, I called up the law schools and I asked them, how many classes you have in trademark and copyright law versus just patent law. Because there's like, so for example, Texas A&M is a really strong IP school here in Dallas, right? Well, Dallas-Fort Worth, they're in Fort Worth. But they do tend to be very patent heavy. There's not as many trademark and copyright programs. But, I think that if you talk to somebody from Texas A&M, they could put you in touch with either a student or two that's kind of focused in soft IP, and you could learn more about it. So that's exactly the method that I would use for any practice area. You figure out which practice areas you're interested in, then try to research some of the, extracurricular activities that they might have, whether they be, so some of the list of extracurricular activities I would look for though are clinics, externships. A lot of schools have really good connections with certain firms or certain companies to do externships. For example, my law school has special relationships with General Electric and Under Armour and a lot of big firms that will take students for externships. And so you might want to find out, what types of externship placements that people generally get.
Okay.
And then let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be some unique outliers out there. Like Innocence Project is a big one just because it's now virtually a ton of different schools. But, I think you really need to think about within your practice area. I would talk to a couple lawyers too and see what types of extracurricular activities that they did in their schools, because in some practice areas, they still very much value moot court. They still very much value law review. All those traditional ones are very, very important because it might require a lot of writing, a lot of advocacy, a lot of those things. So I would definitely, talk to a lot of lawyers in that practice area and find out what they think is important. You can flat out ask these people because they hire students too. They hire people eventually to work at their firms. And, I talked to IP lawyers before going to law school, and I straight out asked them, like, which law schools do you hire from? Because a lot of them only hire from like a set group of schools. And I kept hearing the same ones over and over again when I talked to those lawyers. So then I was like, yeah, those are the ones I'm going to. I think that talking to practitioners, there's no replacement for it. Like, it's scary at first and people don't want to do it, but there's no other way that you can learn about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. What else? Is everybody applying in this cycle or next cycle, or like, where are you guys at?
Hi, I'm a freshman currently.
Holy moly, you're on top of it.
No, I have a while to go.
Nice. All right. Well, that's good.
I'm really a planner kind of.
Yeah. Oh, to be a freshman again, that'd be nice.
I'm planning on studying abroad too. I'm majoring in political science and Spanish, and a part of the requirement is study abroad. And I'm like really worried about like how much time I'll have to study for the LSAT. How much time did you set aside in kind of like scheduling your other classes along with work to sit down and study?
Yeah, so I wasn't in class. I had been graduated for 2 years and I was working 40 hours a week. So I did not have a whole lot of time on my hands. But I took about, I think, 4 months to study for the LSAT, but it totally depends on how much time you can dedicate to it and where you start off at and how good you're doing. Like, the LSAT, unfortunately, is like the equalizer of all things. Like, you can think you're going to law school all you want. If you perform really poorly on the LSAT, well, that might tell you something different. Unfortunately, that's just the way that it is. But I will say that one thing about the LSAT is it is a learned skill, just like anything else. Like, the first time you ever take the LSAT, it's going to look like the craziest thing you've ever seen. Especially the logic game section. You're going to be like, 7 people walked into a party, so-and-so followed so-and-so, so-and-so followed so. Who cares? Why is this being tested for me to go to law school? I think the LSAT is just one of those things that you need to think about as just, a required hump for you to get over in order to get into law school. Sign up for a course, do it religiously, and, don't ever walk into that thing and take it cold. Don't ever walk into the LSAT cold. I've heard of people doing it and they're like, oh, I just wanted to see where I was at. No, you can take a diagnostic test to find out where you're at. But don't just walk in and take the real thing, because you're inevitably going to do terribly if you ever walk in cold and take it, and then you're going to be like, okay, law school's not for me. So don't do that. But yeah, I would say at least 4 months is a good amount of time, depending on how much time you have. For me, with working 40 hours a week, 4 months was about the right time. So, yeah. But you also have plenty of time to think about it, and you can always take a gap year. I know nobody wants to hear it, but you can always take a gap year so that you can actually focus and do, everything that you need to do to write an excellent application. It's hard, especially depending on how you stacked your undergrad education. For people who stacked like their last semester in undergrad super heavy, and then they're trying to apply to law school at the same time, I'm like, no, this is a terrible idea. So don't worry. Like, you can take a gap year as long as you're doing something productive during that time. Go work for an attorney. Go figure out what this stuff is like. Go volunteer for a legal aid organization, something. But yeah, don't worry. You've got plenty of time.
Thank you. Also, another question, not advice.
Yeah.
I know I've been kind of looking at the numbers, and a lot of it's more of a trend of older students applying to law school because of that experience. So what are some things that undergrads that want to go straight into law school, financial reasons, try and get that loans and situated with early, like what are some advice you think to build a strong application for students that are going or wanting to go straight into law school?
Yeah, I mean, well, first and foremost, you have to have a good GPA, have to have, a strong LSAT score, right? So like take classes that you're interested in, that you're going to do well in, that you're going to, I don't care what areas that they're in, I'm not going to tell you have to go be an English major or anything else. You could be from any wide variety of backgrounds. That's totally fine. But make sure that you take classes that you're interested in and that you do well. The other thing is, I think if you're going straight out of school, you need to do a lot more legwork to find out what the practice of law is actually like. Spend your 3 years, 4 years, however many you have left, connecting with lawyers, finding out more about the profession, get a mentor. No, seriously, just get a lawyer mentor. I got one. It was life-changing. I'm a first-generation law student, by the way. I'm first-generation Asian American. My parents are engineers. I didn't know a lick about going to law school, and I wish I did. And I felt, honestly, when I got into law school, I felt like everybody else had the secrets, and I didn't know how to play the game. And it was extremely frustrating for pretty much the first year and a half until I got used to, okay, well, you're the underdog and you're just going to have to figure that out. So, I would take the time, connect with all these, legal organizations. Like which undergrad school are you at?
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. Okay. All right. So Texas Aggie Law Network, I think, is the network for all lawyers who are Aggies. So connect with them. I think there's even an Aggie Bar Association. So bar associations, in case you don't know, are collections of lawyers. People are always confused about what bar associations are. But so there's the state bar, right? So when you graduate from law school, you have to take the bar exam, you get licensed. That's one thing. But there's usually a ton of other types of bar associations that are geared towards people that have similar interests. So there might be a women's bar association, there might be a Hispanic bar association, or an African American bar association. All of these types of associations will help you meet lawyers in those areas. There's, in fact, a lot of practice area focused ones. So there's in Dallas, we have Dallas Trial Lawyers Association. There's Dallas Asian American Bar Association for people who are Asian Pacific Islanders. So, there's all sorts of different types of bar associations where you can connect people with similar interests, and they're going to be a lot more likely to talk to you if you have a particular interest. So, I'll tell you right now, in general, I feel like the affinity bar associations, all the minority bar associations, people are just a lot more, open and willing and kind to reach out and help other people. And so I would try to take advantage of those resources. And then, take a couple extracurricular activities while you're still in undergrad that have something to do with law school. Do moot court. There's, mock trial, moot court, all sorts of, different areas where you can get exposure into the law. And yeah, if you can, get a couple internships with some attorneys, or work for a political candidate, or get some exposure. That's all I'm saying. So I'm amazed at how many people go into law school never having contacted a lawyer beforehand. Never having talked to a lawyer at all. And I'm like, what in the world did you think you were going to get into? So I run a pre-law mentoring program that connects prospective law students to lawyers for mentoring. And some of my students that I work with, when I tell them I want them to connect with real lawyers, they look at me like I have tentacles coming out of my head and I'm from outer space or something. And I'm like, you do realize going to law school, you're going to have to talk to a lot of lawyers. And if you can't talk to them now, you probably have no business going to law school. So absolutely, talk to lawyers. Advice for starting a LinkedIn. Oh man, I could get on my LinkedIn soapbox forever. So this is a that time. But yes, okay. So LinkedIn is not a regurgitation of your resume. Don't just put everything from your resume on your LinkedIn profile. Nobody cares. LinkedIn is where you come off as a real human being. So, yes, put the information from your resume in that work experience section, but make sure the first thing that they're going to see is your picture, the cover photo, and that summary about me section. So picture has to be super professional. Don't just like take a photo, of you hanging out with friends. Like, get somebody to take a professional photo of you. If not, just look up how to take a, good headshot. I'm sure that you can Google that. The cover space in the back, don't just leave it blank. Okay, that's just lazy. Like, don't leave it blank. Have an image back there that represents who you are. Okay, whether it's you participating in some sort of extracurricular activities, or whether it's a graphic that describes like your key strengths, like whatever it is, have something back there that shows your personality. Then in the summary section, speak in the first person, for Christ's sake. Do not talk in the third person, like intuition is an intellectual property word. No. So just speak in the first person. I'm a freshman at Texas A&M University. I'm passionate about XYZ. I'm interested in going to law school. I'm here to connect with lawyers and law students and learn more about the legal profession. Something like that. So, it needs to talk about what you're doing, why you're doing it, how all the pieces of everything in your resume fit together. If you have like 15 years of marketing experience, and then all of a sudden you're going to law school, like people are going to be like, huh? So like, you need to like write something in your summary that connects that together. I think LinkedIn is a great tool to have. If you are planning on going to law school and you're not on LinkedIn yet, I don't know what you're doing. You're living under a rock somewhere. But use it to connect with lawyers. You can search you can search like energy lawyer in Dallas, Texas, and like you'll get hundreds of people that pop up. So, you can search using keyword searches to find people in different practice areas. You can also search by universities. So you can find people who went to the law school that you're interested in, or you can search for people who go to the undergrad university that you were at, who might be more willing to talk to you because they're an alum. Use it to connect with people. And don't just use LinkedIn. Don't just like throw up a LinkedIn page and then, message people. Like, use it to engage, share things, go like whatever you see on LinkedIn that you find that is helpful, share it. The more engaging that you are on LinkedIn, the more that LinkedIn's algorithm will show you to other people. So if you want LinkedIn to be working for you, you need to like engage, comment on people's posts, even if it's like a small comment. Reshare things that you find interesting. Make sure that you use it not just to reach out to people, but also to engage. All right, so we're at 1:08. I have a little bit of extra time. I'm happy to stick around for another 5 minutes or so if anybody else has questions. But other than that, hope you guys are all happy, safe, healthy, enjoying quarantine. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll drop my LinkedIn page here. And if you guys are interested in the mentoring program, check out likeuplegal.com, and we can hook you up with a lawyer mentor. So.
Thanks, Angie.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce
Thank you
your
so
last
much.
name?
Vishayanan. The DA on the end is an immigration mistake that they wouldn't fix for my parents.
Okay.
It's just Vishayanan. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. See you guys.